into blacksmithing started from a very historical interest very early on. Always having great interest in medieval knights and Viking ages and just generally historical interest. And then when I grew older and went to high school and you had to find out what do you want to do for a living, there was this huge book from Aarhus University with all the educations you could choose from. And then there was one picture of a guy standing and forging with a Viking age setup, like a small blacksmith forge and small Viking anvil. And I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be him. So I thought I had to study archaeology because it seemed like, well, that was what you did. But quickly found out that working with my hands and combining this historical knowledge with actual practice, that was so inspiring. So I think that Den Gamle By is for me the perfect place to really combine my great interest in craft and in processes and techniques with the more historical thinking. And a lot of my work as a blacksmith in here is actually combining this sense of making things that has to be historical, even though they weren't historical originally. But when you come here as a guest, you should not be able to sense that, oh, why do they have a railing here? It looks out of place, because it's made with the right techniques that they used at that time, instead of just putting up a modern railing that people would instantly be alarmed about. Oh, what's this? This doesn't fit in place here. Because then that would maybe be the thing that they remembered. But I remember they had these ugly railings that were modern. No, they shouldn't remember them. They should just blend into the surroundings. That's when people doesn't notice what you've made, then you did it the right way. So one of the blacksmith's main function, both historically and also for me today, is that the blacksmith brings function into other people or other people's work. If you look at the common blacksmithing things in a house, well, hinges for windows, doors, locks for doors as well. A lot of this has to do with mechanics and making other things be able to work. That's maybe one of the most satisfying things about being a blacksmith, is that you fix problems. And also there's something about blacksmithing that you have to be in the moment, because sometimes we use a lot of time in our heads thinking, planning ahead, but when you're forging something, you have to be there 100%. You cannot be thinking about tomorrow or what will happen in 2 hours. No, you have to be there or else it will fail, because when you take out the iron from the forge, a timer starts, a clock ticking down, and then you have to really work efficiently. So you really need to be focused and think ahead what we want to do and concentrate on it. That's when forging also becomes therapeutic in some way. I'm not worried that it will disappear. I mean, you cannot say it will never disappear because you don't know that. But what I fear is that the skill level will decrease, or it has decreased. And that's maybe my main mission, is to say that, well, I really have to work hard to become as skilled as possible to be able to learn other people what blacksmithing can do, so that they can acquire the same skills, and then we can raise the skill level, because there's not a lot of limits to what you can do with iron if you have the skill set. That's the dream, that some of the techniques that I uncover and keep alive, that they will be used in a modern context by some people who has a more modern background than mine. And for instance, Jonas, who's working here, he started off in the Blacksmithing Guild as a volunteer, was that for 5 years, took his modern welding education besides that, and then now I have employed him, and we are building on that ground level he learned as a volunteer, learning the trade of the blacksmith as a professional.
So you see, now what we're going to do, so it looks like this. So this part has the thickness to become spread out like that, and because I've rounded the end, when I spread it out, it will also become round. and then this part will be folded up like that. And because I've put the markings in like that, it will have the same sort of shape. It'll be a little bit more rounded than this, but I like that better. So that's the part we're going to do now, is curl this around and try to make it the exact diameter. And that can be a little bit challenging.
Så egentlig bare starter med spidsen.
Ja.
Og så op. Så kører sådan der. Så er du varme. Så varm den til med bakken.
I'm looking if it's straight this way and also this way, if you look at it like this, because if it's a little bit twisted like this, the hinge will be twisted on the door. So this is sort of the part. It has to be pretty, of course, but it also has to have the correct function. So therefore it's quite important. So see, they've actually made the exact same mistake as me by making one a little bit thicker than the other. It was good that I did that. I always really liked being creative from ever since I was very young, and my father is a historian, so I've always liked history and old sort of crafts. I've also also do a little bit of woodworking and making Stone Age tools, things like that. And then I have this very crazy grandpa who is an old farmer, and he had a workshop, a little metalworking workshop with a welder and an angle grinder and things. So whenever I went to holiday there, we would always make bows and arrows and swords and things, and I'd run around and play with them. So I've made many swords just from pieces of old scrap iron that I've then, in a whole weekend or a whole summer vacation, just stuck with an angle grinder and then welded bits and pieces together. And I fell in love with it, with the craft. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do what's called offsetting. So for this to work, this is one of the old ones that we're copying. It needs to have a nice thickness down here. So when we forge this thin part out of it, we'll lose some of the thickness here. So therefore we make it a little bit thicker beforehand. And that means heating it in the middle and then striking it like this. And most of the time it would rather bend than push in on itself. So we need a very short heat, and that's one of the places where the induction forge is really good. I work with many different materials, but iron I think is the material that has the most capabilities. So iron can be anything from a little flower that looks exactly like a real life flower, and it can also be a structural I-beam holding up a complete building, or an axe that is very hard and can cut down a tree. And I don't know any other materials that has that sort of diversity in the sort of creation that you can do with it. I think that's very interesting. I think I've always, a little part of me always wanted to do blacksmithing for a living, but it's not it's something you can really just do in Denmark. There isn't any official place you can go and get a blacksmith education, because it's what in Denmark we call a dead trade. So I decided to do like the closest thing to it that I could as possible, which is become a welder. And in Denmark, to sort of emphasize the fact that blacksmithing is sort of dead craft in Denmark, and the word that we use for blacksmith and for welder in Danish is the same. So they just sort of took the term and just put it on this new thing. And I think that's a little bit misleading, because a lot of people say, "Ooh, I'm becoming a Danish smith. I'm trained to become a smith," and then people are always like, "Oh, so you work with an anvil and hot iron and bellows," but really you're just welding things. And it's a very different craft, but equally as much a beautiful and difficult craft to master as this, but very different. There we go. So that's it for. Let's get it here. So that fits together quite well. There's not a lot of air there, or gaps or anything. And then I'll do my initials and the year. There we go. So it has to sit here through the beam, and one in the bottom here. So you see the one it's replacing is a really poorly forged one that even now it's gone, it fell out. And one modern here where it has the threads on the back side. And also they tried to sort of make a little bit the same style. I think that's also a very cool part, is knowing that, I've visited this museum many times when I was young, and walked around, and I always liked the blacksmith stuff. Always looked at it and thought it was really cool with all the old houses. So I quite like the idea that I can now go around and say that, "Oh, I made that." Maybe I can show to my kids someday when I have kids. I say, "Oh, I made that someday." Yeah, I think that's quite a cool thing to be able to do.